Keanu Reeves stepped onto a $100 million yacht, wearing a hoodie, worn-out jeans, and an old baseball cap. No one recognized him. They laughed at him, mocked his clothes, and told him he didn't belong. One man, Nathan Hawthorne, publicly humiliated him in front of everyone. But what they didn't know was that Keanu wasn't just another passenger. And when the truth came out, the room fell completely silent. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and your support means the world to us. The sun hovered gently above the harbor of Nice, casting golden reflections on the calm Mediterranean waters as the Aurum Majesty, a floating palace worth over $100 million, prepared to set sail on its most exclusive voyage of the year. The luxury cruise, lasting 5 days, promised more than just sea breezes and champagne. It was a curated experience for the elite, culminating in a high-preference charity gala intended to raise millions for children battling cancer. The guest list included CEOs, tech billionaires, socialites, and the self-proclaimed modern aristocracy of Europe and North America. Among the crowd of sharply dressed passengers arriving in black limousines and velvet-lined sedans, one figure stood out, not because of grandeur, but because of the absence of it. A man in a worn gray hoodie, faded jeans, and a sun-washed baseball cap stepped out of a modest taxi, carrying nothing but a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove himself, yet to the outside eye, he looked entirely misplaced. He passed by a group of porters who eyed him with skepticism, then approached the ship's gangway, alone, without entourage, without fanfare. At the check-in station, a woman in a silk blouse and gold-plated name tag greeted guests with the type of rehearsed politeness reserved for those who tipped in hundreds. But as she looked up and saw the man approaching, her expression faltered for a brief second, before reforming into a tight, professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. May I have your name?" she asked, already glancing down at the luxury manifest where she assumed he surely wouldn't be listed. "Keanu Reeves," he replied simply, his voice calm but unassuming. The woman hesitated, scanning the list twice. "I'm sorry, I don't seem to see your name on the passenger registry," she said, her tone growing stiffer. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is check-in for VIP guests." Before he could answer, a booming voice from behind interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" The man who spoke wore a linen suit the color of bone, designer sunglasses perched on his forehead, and a smirk that never quite left his lips. Nathan Hawthorne, CEO of the Hawthorne Group and one of the ship's largest public sponsors, strolled forward with the entitled confidence of a man who believed the world was his private club. The receptionist turned slightly. "He says his name is Keanu Reeves, but he's not on the manifest." Nathan chuckled as he gave Keanu a slow, assessing look from head to toe, his smile laced with amusement. The receptionist, emboldened by Nathan's presence, forced a tight smile and gestured toward the waiting area. "If you could kindly step aside while we verify your information, sir." The "sir" felt hollow. Keanu nodded once without a word, then quietly stepped aside to let the procession of glittering guests pass him, their perfumes lingering longer than their glances. No one offered a seat. No one offered a drink. A pair of young influencers in designer activewear whispered and giggled as they passed, one of them snapping a photo with the caption, "Cruise starts and we've already got stowaways." From his place near the check-in tent, Keanu looked out toward the open water, unmoved, his posture relaxed. He wasn't here for recognition. He wasn't here to impress. And yet, every dismissive glance, every muttered comment, every snide chuckle, they noticed him. They all did. They just didn't know who he was. Not yet. The midday sun filtered gently through linen canopies on the upper deck, casting soft shadows on polished wood and glittering champagne glasses. It was the second day aboard the Aurum Majesty, and the ship had truly come alive. Music played from hidden speakers. Waiters weaved through cabana chairs offering trays of oysters and caviar, and the exclusive Lusso lounge buzzed with laughter and the clinking of designer sunglasses. This was the sanctuary of the ultra-wealthy, a space deliberately designed to exude exclusivity. Keanu, dressed the same as the day before, gray hoodie, worn jeans, old cap, walked quietly through the corridor leading to the lounge, drawn not by the luxury, but by the open view of the sea it offered. He paused just before the glass doors, scanning the horizon where the water melted into sky. It was peaceful and bothered, but the peace didn't last. From behind him came the click of leather loafers, followed by a voice as smooth and cold as the martinis being served inside. "Well," Nathan Hawthorne drawled, folding his arms with theatrical flair, "look who's found his way to the grown-up end of the ship." Keanu turned, calm as ever, "Just wanted a better view of the ocean." Nathan let out a laugh, short, controlled, dismissive. "Oh, I'm sure you did. And I'm sure housekeeping wouldn't mind the extra eyes on the railing, though I must say, you're bold. Most of the staff at least wear uniforms." Keanu met his gaze. "I'm not staff." "Of course you're not," Nathan replied with exaggerated amusement, turning to glance at two women seated nearby. One of them, a tan socialite in a Chanel wrap, whispered with a smirk, "He looks like he got lost on his way to the mainland." The other giggled into her cocktail. Nathan turned back to Keanu and stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Listen, friend, I don't know how you got on this boat, but this isn't a cruise ship. This is curated company. People pay 7 figures just to breathe this air. So, do yourself a favor, stay in your lane." Keanu didn't blink. "And which lane is that?" Nathan leaned in, voice now dripping with contempt. "The one where no one expects you to speak. The one where you're invisible unless carrying a tray." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant sound of waves. Then Keanu spoke, his voice low, steady. "You think you see people clearly, but all you've got is a mirror." Nathan's smirk faltered, but just slightly. Before he could retort, a passing server, unaware of the brewing tension, approached Keanu with a gentle smile. "Excuse me, sir, this area is reserved for our VIP guests. May I kindly ask you to relocate to the promenade deck?" Keanu gave the young man a polite nod. "Of course." He turned to leave, his pace unhurried, posture relaxed. As he walked past Nathan, he paused, just long enough to say quietly, "Thank you for showing me who you are." Nathan stood in place, his jaw tightening. Behind him, the two women chuckled again. One murmured, "He's probably some washed-up actor trying to pretend he belongs here." The other shrugged. "He'll be gone by tomorrow. People like that always are." But Keanu didn't hear them. Or perhaps he did, and chose to let the weight of silence speak louder than any rebuttal. The third day brought with it a lavish brunch spread on the upper sundeck. A sea of white linen tables, dripping chandeliers swaying lightly in the breeze, and a playlist carefully curated to signal wealth without effort. Waiters in pressed black uniforms floated by with platters of foie gras, chilled rosé, and little golden menus listing dishes that required subtitles. Keanu entered quietly, dressed the same as ever. His presence didn't command attention, but it disrupted the rhythm of a crowd that had begun to recognize him, not for who he was, but for who they believed he wasn't. He took a seat at an empty table near the railing, where the view opened wide to a silver ocean. He poured himself a glass of water from a crystal jug and reached for a small plate of bread rolls. Silent, unassuming, the laughter started from 3 tables over. "Jesus, who let the janitor into brunch?" barked a man with a slicked-back mullet and loafers without socks. He was a hedge fund manager from Texas, or at least pretended to be. His voice was loud, intentionally so. "I mean, are we doing charity seating now?" chimed in a brunette in oversized sunglasses. "Should we toss him a few crumbs while we're at it?" Nathan Hawthorne, seated with them, didn't even look up from his grapefruit. "That's not a janitor," he said flatly. "That's the stowaway I told you about." Someone whistled sarcastically. "Bold of him to show up again. Does he not own a mirror?" Nathan finally looked up. "He owns something, I'm sure. A train pass, maybe a tent." Another woman at the table, young and overdressed, narrowed her eyes. Do you think he's dangerous? I mean, look at the way he sits, like he doesn't care who's watching. Because he doesn't belong, Nathan replied, his voice sharp now, pointed like a knife wrapped in silk. He doesn't carry shame, because men like him don't know what dignity feels like. At that moment, a waiter approached Keanu with a plate of smoked salmon. Before the server could place it down, Nathan raised his hand and called out, "You sure that table's been cleared? I'm pretty sure he's not a guest." The entire corner of the sun deck went quiet for a beat. The waiter hesitated. Keanu looked up. "It's all right, I can serve myself," he said gently, taking the plate from the waiter with a small nod of gratitude. "Oh, he speaks," someone sneered. Another added, "Careful, you'll spook him. He might scamper back to the engine room." As Keanu began to eat, one of the women, wine drunk before noon, rose from her seat and walked deliberately to his table. She leaned in, her voice a low, mocking whisper, just audible enough for the nearby crowd. "Tell me," she slurred, "do you actually think you're invisible here, or do you just enjoy being pitied?" Keanu didn't answer. She scoffed and straightened up. "Or maybe you're just hoping someone rich takes you home like a stray." That earned a roar of laughter from her table. Nathan clinked his glass with hers as she returned, triumphant. Keanu calmly folded his napkin, stood, and placed his untouched plate on a side tray. Then he turned to face them, not with fury, but with something that unsettled them more: silence, and a stare that saw through every facade. A pause, then with quiet dignity he said, "It's always fascinating how the loudest insults come from the most fragile egos." And with that he walked away. Not faster, not slower, just enough for the laughter behind him to turn hollow, then fade completely. If you loved this story and want to see more powerful moments like this from Keanu Reeves, leave the number 8 in the comments below to let us know you're with us. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you more stories that truly matter. The sky above the Aurum Majesty had turned a soft crimson as the sun began its descent into the Mediterranean. It was the night of the captain's formal dinner, a black tie event only reserved for those deemed elite enough to sit beneath the crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom. Guests shimmered in tailored tuxedos and couture gowns. Laughter floated like perfume, and the room pulsed with the kind of smug joy only the rich ever mastered. Every detail of the night, from the engraved silverware to the live string quartet, had been curated to flatter the egos of those in attendance. Keanu entered quietly through a Nathan Hawthorne muttered from across the ballroom, loud enough to halt a conversation at the next table. He stood, wineglass in hand, and pointed directly at Keanu, like he was identifying a roach on fine china. "Security!" Nathan called out, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "We've got a dress code violation, or maybe a charity case. I honestly can't tell." Laughter burst from his table, this time louder, more cutting. A woman with diamond earrings the size of bullets smirked and added, "Maybe he's delivering food. If so, he's late." Another guest chimed in, "Nah, he's probably here to clean the toilets. Shoulda come in uniform, though. Might have earned a tip." Keanu said nothing. He simply stood where he was, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. But Nathan wasn't done. He was thriving now. This was blood sport to him. "You know," he said, raising his voice further, drawing attention from across the ballroom, "it's honestly insulting that someone thinks they can just walk into this space looking like that. This isn't a soup kitchen. This is a luxury vessel. And I've invested millions to make sure it stays that way." Keanu finally took a step forward. The room had gone deathly quiet. Even the quartet had stopped playing. Nathan scoffed. "You really don't get it, do you? You don't belong here. You're not one of us. You're not even close." A beat passed. No one moved. No one intervened. Then Nathan delivered the final blow, his voice dripping with venom. "You're nobody, dressed like a mistake. And the only reason anyone noticed you is because you look like the only person on this ship who could be mopped off the floor." The silence that followed was thick, ugly. Keanu stood still, taking it all in. His eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but with something worse, understanding. He saw every face, every coward who stayed quiet, every smirk that had now faded, every glass raised in mockery, every mouth that had laughed. And then, without anger, without sarcasm, without even raising his voice, he said, "You just proved something I hoped wasn't true." Nathan blinked. "What's that?" Keanu held his gaze. "That wealth can buy the room, but not the soul that should fill it." And with that, he turned and walked out. No one stopped him. They were too stunned, too uncomfortable, too exposed, and none of them, especially Nathan Hawthorne, had the faintest idea who they had just humiliated in front of the entire ship. But they would. Very, very soon. The night air over the Aura Majesty had turned cool, but inside the grand ballroom, the temperature felt as though it had dropped by several degrees. The chandeliers still shimmered, the glasses still clinked, the string quartet had resumed their tune, but something had shifted, subtly yet powerfully, since the man in the hoodie walked out in silence. Nathan Hawthorne returned to his seat with a triumphant smirk, raising his wine glass once more. "Well," he said to his table, "that should set a precedent. No riffraff in our sanctuary, agreed?" But before anyone could respond, the lights dimmed. All chatter faded as the cruise director took the stage near the velvet-draped podium. A single spotlight focused on her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear, bright, and entirely unaware of the storm she was about to unleash. "Before we continue with tonight's charity auction, we have a very special announcement." Some guests straightened their backs. Nathan didn't bother looking up. "As many of you know," the director continued, "this voyage was made possible by the generous support of several sponsors, but one contribution stood far above the rest. One donor who asked to remain anonymous covered nearly half the cost of this journey and pledged $2 million to our cause before even stepping foot on board." A murmur ran through the crowd. Nathan frowned slightly. "$2 million? Anonymous." The director smiled warmly and looked toward the ballroom entrance. "It is now my honor," she said, "to formally introduce the man whose generosity made this evening and this entire voyage possible. An individual known not only for his philanthropy, but for his extraordinary humility and grace." Chairs scraped the marble floor. A woman dropped her glass. It shattered, forgotten, and there he was. Emerging quietly from the corridor just as he had entered 3 nights ago, hoodie still on, cap still low, calm as ever, Keanu Reeves walked toward the spotlight. One man near the front clutched his chest. "Jesus Christ, it's him!" A cluster of influencers at the side whispered frantically, "That's Keanu Reeves. Oh my God, that's actually him. What have we done?" The color drained from Nathan's face, as though someone had pulled the blood from beneath his skin. He rose slowly, disbelieving. "No," he muttered. "No, it can't be. That guy? That guy was him?" But it was, and there was no undoing it. Keanu stepped onto the stage, nodded politely to the director, then turned to face the room that had mocked him, measured him, stripped him of worth based on nothing but fabric and silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply began to speak. "I wasn't here to be seen," he said, scanning the crowd. "I wasn't here to make a statement or wear a tuxedo or win applause. I came here to understand, to witness, without a name, how people treat others when there's nothing to gain." The room was utterly still. All eyes were on him. Some dropped their gaze in shame. "I was judged by what I wore, mocked for how I looked, rejected by those who didn't even ask my name," he continued, each word falling like a weight in the silence. He paused, letting the tension twist itself around every throat. "And yet, what I saw wasn't new. It wasn't unique to this ship. It's something deeper. It's the sickness of measuring human worth by surface." He turned his eyes, calm but piercing toward Nathan, especially when the loudest voices belong to the smallest souls. Nathan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A desperate chuckle, a half-step backward. Keanu didn't flinch. "I'm not angry," he said softly, "but I am disappointed." With that, he left the podium, walking through a parting sea of silence. No applause, no cameras dared click, just breathless, shame-choked stillness. Because they hadn't humiliated a nobody, they had humiliated Keanu Reeves, the man who paid for the champagne they toasted with, the suite they slept in, the music they danced to, and in doing so, they revealed everything about themselves. Are you still here with us? If you're still watching at this point, drop the number 2 in the comments, just so we know you're part of this moment too. Silence lingered long after Keanu Reeves had stepped off the stage. A silence lingered long after Keanu Reeves had stepped off the stage. A silence seemed to mute even the ocean itself. The ballroom of the Aurum Majesty, once pulsing with inflated laughter and the false bravado of old money, now felt hollow, like a theater after the curtain falls, when all the masks have slipped and no one dares speak their real lines. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting nervously, as if trying to undo what had already been burned into memory. A few attempted polite smiles, the kind used at funerals. Others reached for champagne flutes with shaking hands, not to toast, but to forget. And in the very center of it all, Nathan Hawthorne sat frozen, like a wax figure suddenly left under real light. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his untouched wine glass. His face, so often composed in smug authority, now wore something rare and raw. Disbelief, disorientation, and beneath it all, fear. Not the fear of Keanu Reeves as a man, but the fear of what he himself had become under the weight of a spotlight he could no longer control. At his table, no one spoke to him. The women who had laughed at his jokes moments ago now stared at their plates. The hedge fund manager who had clinked glasses with him shifted 3 seats down. A young influencer who had whispered insults about Keanu earlier now frantically deleted her Instagram story, her fingers trembling. The ship's captain approached Nathan quietly from behind, his voice low and deliberate. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, "Mr. Reeves has just requested that the donation be made anonymously, and that no further public gestures be made in his honor." Nathan turned slightly, his jaw tight. "Of course he did," he muttered, his voice brittle. The captain didn't blink. "However," he added, "he also left a message for you." Nathan stiffened. "For me?" The captain unfolded a small handwritten note and placed it gently on the table beside Nathan's untouched appetizer. No one leaned in to read, no one dared ask. Nathan picked it up with mechanical slowness, like it might burn him. It read, in simple, elegant handwriting, "You taught me something I already knew. Some men wear suits like armor, others wear them like masks. You chose the wrong one. K.R." Nathan folded the paper once, then again, and again until it nearly vanished in his palm. But nothing could fold away the sting in those words. Nothing could shrink the weight now pressing against his ribs. From across the room, a woman he once danced with hours earlier stood and whispered to her friend, "I thought he was powerful. Turns out he's just loud." The comment hit him harder than any insult. Outside the ballroom, on the lower deck where the sea met steel, Keanu leaned quietly against the railing, the night air brushing through his hair. He looked out at the open water, endless and still. A young staff member passed him, hesitated, then turned back. "Mr. Reeves," the boy said nervously, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened there. Thank you for how you handled it." Keanu smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me." "But I do," the boy replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Because if someone like you can be treated like that, then people like me don't stand a chance." Keanu turned fully now, his voice low and certain. "No. It means we all have a choice, to be like them, or to be better." The boy nodded, a little straighter, and walked away. Behind them, the ship continued its journey. But everything had changed. Not the decor, not the music, but the mirror everyone now saw themselves in. And for Nathan Hawthorne, who had once thought he owned this voyage, it had become painfully, humiliatingly clear. He never even belonged on it. The morning after felt like the aftermath of a storm no one saw coming. Sunlight spilled gently across the deck of the Aurum Majesty, but its warmth could not touch the coldness that lingered beneath the skin of those who remained aboard. The grandeur was still there. The marbled floors, the polished brass railings, the gentle sound of waves brushing against the hull. But it now existed like the empty shell of a masquerade, stripped of the illusions it once carried. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. The name Keanu Reeves had been spoken in almost every corner of the ship, first in disbelief, then in stunned recognition, and finally in a hush born from guilt. Some guests attempted to justify themselves, claiming they hadn't known, hadn't heard, hadn't laughed. Others remained silent, consumed by a shame too thick to wash away with apologies. Nathan Hawthorne did not appear at breakfast. He had not spoken a word since the letter. In his private suite, curtains drawn tight against the daylight, he sat at the edge of the bed, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled from a sleepless night. The man who once strode across decks as though they belonged to him now stared blankly at his own reflection in the mirror. A face no longer smug, no longer sure, just exposed. His assistant knocked, then cautiously entered. "Mr. Hawthorne, the press is starting to reach out. Apparently someone on board filmed parts of last night's speech. It's already trending." Nathan said nothing. He barely moved. The assistant shifted uncomfortably, then added, "There's also an email from Mr. Reeves' team. They've declined any media interviews. He doesn't want publicity. Just peace." A long pause passed before Nathan spoke, his voice low, brittle. "That's what makes it worse." He dismissed the assistant with a wave, then stood and walked slowly toward the window. He pulled the curtain aside, not to admire the sea, but to catch one last glimpse of the tender boat quietly departing, cutting across the glassy surface of the water. On it stood Keanu, shoulders relaxed, gaze fixed on the horizon, utterly untouched by the wreckage he left behind. But it wasn't wreckage made of anger or revenge. It was silence and dignity and truth. Down on the lower deck, a handful of crew members stood at attention, hands folded in front of them. Among them was the young waiter from the night before, the one who had watched Keanu walk away from that humiliating ballroom without a single raised voice. He whispered to a colleague. He didn't need cameras or quotes, he just needed to show them who they were. And that was exactly what he had done. In the ballroom, the captain gathered the remaining guests for one final address. His voice was steady, but beneath it ran a quiet steel. This voyage was never meant to be about status. It was meant to reflect generosity, compassion, and character. Last night reminded us all how far we still have to go. He held up the note Keanu had left behind. A second one, meant not for any individual, but for all. You don't lose dignity when you wear less. You lose it when you treat others as less. Silence followed. Some nodded slowly, others turned away, their shame still too fresh to face. As the Aurum Majesty continued its path across the sea, it did so with fewer conversations, fewer selfies, and fewer illusions. The tuxedos still gleamed, the champagne still poured, but something had cracked. And for Nathan Hawthorne, that crack would never close. Because some wounds, especially the ones carved by truth, do not bleed. They echo. Weeks had passed since the Aurum Majesty docked for the last time, but the story of what happened aboard had only begun to ripple outward. It started quietly. A single video uploaded by a shaken crew member, capturing the moment Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage. No hashtags, no captions, just the truth. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. People around the world watched as a man, dressed in simplicity, wrapped in humility, stood before a room of gold and shattered every illusion that wealth ever built. They saw not an actor, but a mirror. Nathan Hawthorne's name disappeared from gala invitations. His partnerships evaporated. He stopped appearing in boardrooms. And in time, he stopped speaking in crowded rooms altogether. He had built his empire on the illusion of power. But all it took was one man refusing to raise his voice to bring it crashing down. As for Keanu, he never spoke publicly about the incident. He never needed to, but in a quiet corner of a small bookstore in Vancouver, a handwritten note was taped to the window. A quote scribbled in a delicate looping pen: "Status is given by others, but dignity is a choice." And beneath it, just two initials: K.R. Looks don't define a person. Fame doesn't define worth. The only thing that truly defines you is how you treat someone when you believe they have nothing to offer you. In a world obsessed with appearances, be the one who remembers. Dignity doesn't need to be recognized, it only needs to be upheld. Have you ever been misjudged because of how you looked? Or did you ever realize too late that you misjudged someone else? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal who we really are when no one's watching. Because sometimes,